Now, welcome everyone. I'm Lindsay from the Longmeadow Adult Center. Thank you for being here. Today's program, Baseball in American Culture with Evan Weiner, is co-hosted with Storrs Library and sponsored by Filoca. And we're sharing our recording of today with LCTV and with Valley Eye Radio. And I'll let Evan take it away. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay, for inviting me. I'm going to mute everybody here so we don't have the background noise. I have no rules here, so if you want to just throw your comments into the box, I'll try to answer it as we go. I don't have a script, so given I don't have a script, and if you have any questions as I go, that's fine, not a problem. Again, thank you, Lindsay and the center, for inviting me. My name is Evan Weiner. I've been doing this kind of thing for nearly 50 years, since 11th grade at Spring Valley High School, Rockland County, New York, about 23 miles north of Manhattan. And I was on radio at the age of 15, the commercial radio, WRKL radio in Rockland County, doing my local high school show. And I was also at the same time with the Bergen Record and the Nyack Journal News, two newspapers. And that was all because of a guy by the name of Joe Dionisio, who said, "Student, you have a good voice. How would you like to be on radio?" He was my 11th grade teacher. Joe and I still talk 50 years later, believe it or not, and he still calls me student. I also ended up on WNEW radio when I was 21 in New York City, and among the stories that I covered there, interviewed Ronald Reagan and the returning hostages from Iran in January of 1981. But we're here to talk about baseball, and we're here to talk partially about my old acquaintance. And I know this is Red Sox country, and I know I probably shouldn't be mentioning the Yankees all that much, but hey, look, over Yogi's head is Ted Williams. Yogi was a central part of the golden age of baseball in the 1950s. Now, the golden age of baseball was golden in the New York area because 1950 to 58, the New York team was in the World Series, and the old Brooklyn Dodgers, the Los Angeles Dodgers, in the World Series in 1959, and then 5 more years of the Yankees. That's the golden age. It wasn't such a golden age in, say, Kansas City or in Boston even, because you lost the Boston Braves, which moved to Milwaukee after the 1952 season. But back in 1954, there was a philosopher by the name of Jacques Barzun, and he might have had Yogi in mind when he was talking about this, or just baseball in general, because Barzun said in a series of essays, one of the essays on baseball, whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball. And don't go to a major league game. Now, go to a high school game, go to a sandlot game, because you can see Americans interact with one another on the baseball field. But baseball has been a major part of the culture, or was a major part of the culture, not so much today, since 1865, because the president, Andrew Johnson, who assumed office after Lincoln was assassinated, also had to assume Reconstruction. And how do you get the Northerners and the Southerners on the same page, or at least start the process with the Northerners and Southerners on the same page after the Civil War? And Johnson thought the way to do that was with baseball. And he invited members of the Brooklyn Atlantic's baseball team and the Washington baseball team to the White House, unity through baseball. And maybe there's some commonality, because during the Civil War, people in the South played baseball, people in the North played baseball. So Johnson and his advisors thought maybe we could send a message out, unity through baseball. By 1888, baseball was ingrained in the American culture. Now, that's a cell from the Disney movie, Casey at the Bat. And back in 1965, I was in 4th grade. I had Miss Alexander as my teacher, PS 151, Woodside, Queens. I was a year ahead. They threw me out of kindergarten into 1st grade because the kindergarten teacher couldn't handle me, nor did Mrs. Topper, my 1st grade teacher, but I had to stay in 1st grade. Anyway, so I'm in 4th grade. I'm a year ahead of everybody. And we get an assignment from Miss Alexander. And Miss Alexander, we all thought was about 117 years old. She had blue hair, and she had the white blouse. She had the blue skirt, and she had the napkin stuck here in case her nose started to run, she'd just whip it out and just blow her nose and put the napkin back. But anyway, it's around March or April 1965, and we get an assignment in class. Read Casey at the Bat. Oh, that sounds good because it's a poem about baseball. Sounds really good. Read Casey at the Bat. Okay, and then analyze it. Well, yeah, okay. So I read it, and then I have to write a paragraph about it. And basically, it was one sentence. Casey was a lousy player because he struck out. Remember, there's no joy in Mudville, for the mighty Casey has struck out. And Miss Alexander didn't really like my answer, although I'll stick to it all these years later, 56 years later, that he was a lousy baseball player. He had a chance to win the game. There's no joy in Mudville, for the mighty Casey struck out. She says, no, 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 you got it all wrong. You got it all wrong. It's about man being able to have some success and fails. I said, again, he's a rotten baseball player. He struck out. She was never going to convince me. And to this day, she's not going to convince me. And I don't even think Ernest Thayer, who wrote the poem, would have been able to convince me, but I don't think he really cared about the poem. Seems to me he just wrote this thing as a throwaway, because when it appeared in the San Francisco Examiner on June 3rd, 1888, he didn't even bother putting his name on it. It was either anonymous or Finn, his nickname, when he went to Harvard back in the day. So who is Thayer and who is Casey? Well, Thayer and I have one thing in common. Thayer was a columnist with the San Francisco Examiner between 1886 and 1888 in the 19th century, and I wrote some ed pieces for the San Francisco Examiner in the 21st century back in 2001. Casey's printed on June 3rd, 1888. No author's credit. But Thayer would eventually read the poem at a Harvard class reunion in 1895, 7 years after it came out, 7 years after it became ingrained in the American culture, thanks to this guy, DeWolf Hopper. Before I get into Hopper, who was Casey? Well, no, Thayer never said who Casey was. Could have been King Con Kelly, who is a great baseball star of the 1880s, which was roughly the time that Thayer went to Harvard before he went out west to San Francisco to write. It could be from Stockton, California. There are people in Stockton who named their local baseball team the Mudville Nine because they said Casey was in the Casey. They're talking about one of our own guys who struck out. Well, Thayer never said that. Another guy put up a theory that it was a guy by the name of Casey, Dave Casey, who played with Baltimore in the mid-1880s. But Thayer never said who it was. Who could it have been? We never found out. Why did he print it anonymously? Well, you know, it might have, like I said, just been a throwaway piece. I write op-ed pieces, been writing them for years, and some days you just put something together, throw it out there, and hey, you've done your job. It's not the best, but you've done your job. But anyway, this guy, some of you of a certain age might remember his daughter, Heather Hopper, the actress turned gossip columnist. By the 1960s, she was on television on those Merv Griffin panels, you know, talk shows and alike. But her father is DeWolf Hopper. And he somehow gets a hold of this poem and he falls in love with it immediately. And within about 10 weeks, he's out on the stage performing this. Remember, it's printed on June 3rd, and 2731 is 38 plus 14. 52 days later, 7 weeks later, he's on the stage performing Casey at the Bat. He loved this thing. And he's on the vaudeville stage. And he would perform this poem more than 10,000 times in his career. He would do it on record. He would do it on film, silent film, but he would do it on film. But you had the voice from him because he did it on record. But if you didn't want to go down to the Vaudeville Hall to see DeWolf Hopper, there was a chance that you could listen to it in your own home in the mid-1890s. This is the Springfield Library, Springfield, New Jersey, and I speak there regularly, once or twice a year when there's no COVID, and I've never done the baseball talk there, but I've done other talks there. And that Regina Sublima is actually a cylinder with a needle or an arm across it. You crank it up and it plays. And you could hear Casey at the bat on that. Debbie, who is the runs the Springfield Library, actually played it for me. And there's a Sousa march on there that is in there. And the story behind this in that library is that there was a guy who was a hermit, lived by himself, had no contact with the outside world, lived in town, died. They went into his place. There were no known heirs, and he had all this stuff like the cylinder recorder over there and the stuff behind me in that case. The library has a museum room where you speak, and the museum is this guy's junk, which really isn't junk. It's actually good stuff. So that's Russell Hunting. And Russell Hunting was an entertainer, and he played around with sound. And he is one of the people who decided, hey, you know what? We could actually do this with cylinders and people will buy it because we can put stuff on it. So he's an entertainer, and he was an early sound recordist. He recorded it in 1893 and again in 1898. Both times he used a heavy Irish brogue because he assumed Casey was Irish. Could have been Dave Casey, could have been somebody else, King Kong Kelly, who was also Irish. In 1905, John Kaiser recorded it for Thomas Edison down in Menlo Park, New Jersey. Hopper's version was recorded for Victor, not RCA Victor quite yet, his master's voice, Dipper the dog, and that comes out in 1906. Now, if I speak on cruise ships, and I was up in Chicoutimi, Quebec, almost 2 years ago. And one of the things I love on cruise ships is going into places such as this, somebody's garage, and his garage is set up like an antique store. And he owns it. He's not selling any of this. And he's got a gramophone there. And I said, this is perfect after talking about Kaiser and Hopper, because if you got the record in 1905, 1906, and you had one of those phonographs in your house, you crank it all up and you could hear Casey at the bat. And if you notice, next to the phonograph is a picture of Thomas Edison, or a poster of Thomas Edison phonographs. Hopper would be the first to commit the verse to film. That would be in 1922, a short subject by Lee DeForest. Wallace Beery starred in the 1927 version of the film. The comic Jerry Colonna, and when I was doing this, I was doing a senior residence the other day, and I said to the senior residents, hey, do you know who Jerry Colonna is? One woman said, yeah, with Bob Hope, and he was Bob Hope's sidekick. And he records a rendition for Disney. And for those of you who didn't know who Jerry Colonna was, he had a big bushy mustache, which was his trademark. He was Bob Hope's second banana, but he did things on his own, like voice a rendition of Casey at the Bat, which would be the basis for the Walt Disney cartoon in 1946 called Casey at the Bat. Jackie Gleason performed it on his television show in the 1950s. Johnny Bench, Tug McGraw, and others voiced the poem, often in orchestral settings. I'm not sure if George Steinbrenner fired Billy Martin or rehired Billy Martin, but the two of them did it together in Tampa to raise money for the Tampa PBA, Casey at the Bat, in an orchestral setting. Now, if you are in New York and you ride the subways in New York, and I'm not sure if it's the same with the T. It's been a long time since I've been on the T, 2004. But in the New York City subways, there are placards that surround the subway car, advertisements for like Dr. Zenmore's zit removal, which is big in New York. Anyway, there's a songwriter by the name of Jack Norwith, and he's riding the subway back in 1907, 1908, and he starts studying this poster or the placard. It says ball game today at the Polo Grounds. The New York Giants spent money to advertise themselves. Ball game today at the Polo Grounds. And he starts thinking, and he starts thinking, and he starts thinking, hey, maybe I can write a song about baseball. And he goes, sees his colleague, Albert von Tilzer. and he says, I want to write this song about baseball. Norwith was a guy who was an entertainer. And do they still use the Polo Grounds? No, it was knocked down after the New York Jets American Football League's 1963 season. Anyway, so he's talking to Von Tilzer, and they come up with this idea for a song that was made re-famous, if that's a word, re-famous, or brought into the modern era by this guy, Harry Carey, on WGN in Chicago, and in Boston area. You could see WGN, the superstation, when Harry was around. And it would be at the top of the seventh, end of the top of the seventh, before the bottom of the seventh inning, and Harry would lead the crowd at Wrigley Field into a rousing rendition of "Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, for we will root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out," at the old ball game. I worked with Harry in 1994, 95, which you don't see in this picture, as Harry is surrounded by 6 of his best friends named Bud. Last name Weiser, Bud Weiser. Harry passed away, but the tradition carries on in Wrigley Field, and they have somebody coming in, a guest coming in at every home game, and they sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." But there's a catch. You can't sing it well, because Harry didn't sing it well, so you can't sing it well. But let's take a look at "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," because most people only know the second verse, actually, of the song, and the fourth verse of the song. Katie Casey, she has the baseball bug, and she has it bad. She has baseball fever. And she's going out what appears to be a date with her boyfriend. Maybe it's her husband, probably her boyfriend, might even be a brother or just a friend, or her father. And so anyway, it's probably the boyfriend. And Katie Casey, we think, is from Lower Manhattan or from Brooklyn, and she goes out with the guy. And the guy says, listen, let's go out. I want to take you to a show. No, I don't want to go to a show. Don't want to go to a show. But I can tell you what I want you to do. And she lets out, "Take me out to the ball game." Kind of an interesting song in this way. It might have been the first women's liberation song, because the song is from the viewpoint of a woman, and women were not exactly welcomed at baseball games, or it was thought it was very unladylike for a woman to show up at a baseball game in 1908. But Norwith had a girlfriend prior to writing the song who was one of these suffragettes who wanted to vote and was a very forward-thinking woman. Now, he broke up with her, but in the back of his mind, this woman probably still had some influence on him and on the song, because it's written from a woman's viewpoint. And so we don't know if they ended up at the baseball game or not. But the third stanza, we know a couple of things about Katie Casey. Katie knows all the players. They don't have any numbers on their back. They don't have any names on their back, but she knows all the players. And if there's a bad call on the field, she is going to give the umpire what it was worth to try to overturn that decision, because it's against her team. So again, very unladylike. You're at a ball game, you're not supposed to yell at the umpire in 1908, but she is yelling at the umpire. And she also knows how to get the players aroused, singing the song, and that's the fourth stanza. Like I said, might have been one of the first women's lib songs written by 2 guys from a women's point of view. In fact, in 2019, the Washington Post, in an op-ed piece, a writer speculated that it was one of the earliest women's liberation songs ever. Take Me Out to the Ball Game, Take Me Out to the Crowd. It's written by Norwith and Von Tilzer. Norwith does not see a baseball game until 1928, 20 years after the song was written. Von Tilzer would see a baseball game in 1940, 32 years after the song is written. But oddly enough, the song is pretty much forgotten after it's made famous on the vaudeville stage by Norwith's then wife, Nora Bayes. Nora Bayes introduces the song on the vaudeville stage, along with Shine On Harvest Moon. And of the two songs that were released roughly at the same time, Take Me Out to the Ball Game is played virtually every day somewhere in the United States and in Canada under normal circumstances without COVID between late February almost until November. Shine On Harvest Moon, probably if you watch an old cartoon or if you got XM Sirius Radio, you could hear Shine On Harvest Moon there. But the song is not embraced by baseball. You figure it'd be embraced by baseball, but it's not. It was played for the first time at a Major League Baseball game during the 1934 World Series in Detroit. St. Louis Cardinals, the Gas House Gang, against the Detroit Tigers, where it's finally played. Now, the song would take on a life of its own. Here is Groucho Marx in Night at the Opera. There is a picture of Groucho, Harpo, and Chico with Lou Gehrig as well, because it seemed that the Marx Brothers would work baseball into some of whatever antics they were doing, and they would do it in this movie, Night at the Opera, which is probably at the library. And Night at the Opera, I'll make it very simple. Groucho is working for Margaret Dumont, who's the chief patron of this opera company in New York. She learns of this great tenor in Italy. They go over to Italy, Margaret Dumont, Groucho Marx, and the other people from the opera company. And of course, Groucho gets sidelined because he's got Chico and Harpo, who suddenly become his friends. And they got the world's greatest tenor, they think, in their mind, and he needs a break. And Groucho kind of sympathizes with Harpo and Chico. Well, to make a long story short, Harpo, Chico, and the singer are stowaways as they get back to New York. They finally do get back to New York. There's all kind of other things that are going on. Finally, they get to the Opera House. And the plan is you got to get rid of the tenor, the real tenor, and get the stowaway up there. And to do so, they have to knock out the real tenor, and then they got to buy some time because this guy's got to get dressed, the other tenor, and he gets dressed, and to kill some time, install Harpo and Chico get sheet music and give it to all the orchestra members in the pit, and it's Take Me Out to the Ball Game. They start a catch, and Groucho drops down and starts selling peanuts and Cracker Jacks. Harpo Marx would return to the song on I Love Lucy in 1955. Numerous movies and TV shows featured that song. By the way, Norwood and Von Tilzer are in the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and I'll get to where they fit in the Cooperstown in a little bit. Now, that is Lou Costello on the right, and that is Bud Abbott on the left. And Abbott and Costello's famous routine is who's on first, what's on second. It's a routine that was very common in vaudeville burlesque circuit back in the 20s and 30s. And it's simply this: you have the idiot or the pinhead, Costello, and he gets into a conversation with the wise guy, Bud Abbott. In this case, it's about baseball, and Costello is a big baseball fan, and of course, Abbott is with the St. Louis team, and Costello wants to know the lineup and starts out who's on first, and Bud Abbott says, who? That's who I'm asking, and it goes round and round and round and round and round, and it was a style that was nicknamed Rounders. Now, baseball was not invented in 1839 by Abner Doubleday up in Cooperstown, New York. That didn't happen. Although the Mills Commission, which was a turn of the 19th into 20th century commission, was looking how baseball started, and they wanted to get a story about how baseball started, and they would find eventually, I'm a heretic, huh? Anyway, they would find a guy by the name of Abner Graves, who was in Denver, who was an alcoholic, who was accused of killing his wife. But they interviewed him, and he says, it was Polo Grounds. I said after the 1963 season, and there is the staircase from the Polo Grounds. It's still there, which is right across from Yankee Stadium. But anyway, they find this guy, Abner Graves, and the narrative is great. He saw Abner Doubleday in 1839 lay out the field in Cooperstown. That's it. That is it. But If you go to North Adams, Massachusetts, over in the Berkshires, and I speak in the Berkshires every summer, and there's an old factory that's been turned into an art museum, but across the street from that old factory turned into an art museum is the Berkshire Baseball Museum. Some of you might have gone there. And it's basically about Jack Chesborough, who won 41 games with the Highlanders of New York in 1941, the Yankees' predecessors. And it's about Jeff Reardon, who came from that area, and some local players. And in the front of the storefront, there is an article talking about how the game of baseball, B-A-S-E, capital B-A-L-L, was played in Pittsfield in 1792. And most assuredly that baseball evolved from that game called rounders. So it's kind of interesting that the most famous routine, comedy routine about baseball comes out of an art form called rounders, and baseball probably came out of rounders. Now, who wrote this thing? Well, it might have been Mike Musto who wrote this thing. He apparently claimed authorship of this, although there were other people who also said they were authors. I have comic friends. I speak on cruise ships, and John Joseph is one of my comic friends. You might have remembered his mentor, Alan King, the comic who seemed to be always on Ed Sullivan, and with good reason. When somebody didn't show up on the Ed Sullivan show, they would call Alan, who is just literally a subway ride away in Jackson Heights, get on the 7 train, get off at 42nd Street, walk to the Ed Sullivan Theater, and I'm ready. But anyway, John Joseph said, of course, that they paid Michael Musto $15. John and his former partner, Johnny B, used to do an offshoot of Who's on First musically. And then my other friend, Max Docelli, who grew up with Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David, we'll talk about them in a bit, along with Carol Leifler and Paul Reiser, the Caroline circuit in New York. And he was the king of, literally the king of cruise ships, Max, for 40 years. He was always in demand on cruise ships. Anyway, he said, hey, we're comics. We steal everything. Well, they don't steal everything. If you know anything about Rodney Dangerfield, I get no respect. That came from his friend George Schultz, who retired and said, use it. I get no respect. George Schultz opened a comedy club in Brooklyn. But anyway, so was it a baseball burlesque or vaudeville routine? Yeah, it was. It's been suggested Abbott might have done a version of it before he met Costello on the burlesque circuit. Yeah, it might have been. He said it came out of another routine. But Abbott and Costello would get the routine around 1936, refine it, go around the country. They become players on the Kate Smith CBS radio show in 1937-38, which was one of the top-rated radio shows of the day. And on March 24th, 1938, they unleashed it. And it killed. It absolutely killed, and it put Abbott and Costello into another orbit. They may have gotten some help from John Grant, who was Costello's writer, and Will Glickman, who lasted into the 1960s as a comedy writer, doing Car 54, Where Are You?, which had a lot of baseball references in that show. Abbott and Costello performed at the White House for Franklin Roosevelt. Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower performed it in movies, on radio and TV. Abbott and Costello were enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame in 1956. You go to the Hall of Fame and there's a constant loop of Abbott and Costello doing Who's on First. Vin Scully, the Los Angeles Dodgers announcer who started out in Brooklyn in 1950 and went to Los Angeles for the 1958 season. About 15 years ago, Vinny is on television and radio. He did the first 2 innings simulcasting, and then Charlie Steiner took over on radio. Anyway, Vin is looking up at his screen and he sees this image and he says something to the effect that now we know the answer to the eternal baseball question of who's on first. Ladies and gentlemen, who is on first? The Dodgers had a player from South Korea named Hu, H-U, and there he is. He's on first base. There was a Watt on second. He played with the Washington Senators before this routine became famous, but I can guarantee you this. There was never a third baseman on any level of baseball who was ever called I don't give a darn. About 4 years ago, I went up to Hyde Park, Franklin Roosevelt's presidential library, because I needed to get some answers from Franklin Roosevelt about some things that I wanted answered. And Franklin and Eleanor, perfect hosts, a little stiff, but yeah, they were okay. They had books. Books were a little stiff. That was okay too. But I needed to talk to Franklin about a number of things because I do a whole bunch of talks. One of them about the 1936 Olympics with Marty Glickman, who I worked with, and Sam Stoller, who I knew. He ran the Milrose Games, and Gretel Bergman, who I interviewed in 1993, who all missed the 1936 Olympics. But that's part of one of my talks. But anyway, wanted to ask Roosevelt, how come you sent the American team to Berlin in 1936 to legitimize the Hitler regime? And the answer was, because why punish the athletes? They've trained hard, and let them do what they were going to do. And as Marty Glickman once told me, back in the 1980s, when I worked with him for his broadcasting school, he said, I wanted to go to Berlin in the worst way because I wanted to win that medal and stick it right in the Fuhrer's face. And a lot of the Americans felt that way. Marty never competed. He was pulled by Avery Brundage, but you got to watch my 1936 talk to find out why. Anyway, so I got the answer to that. Roosevelt was the first American on American TV, first guy on American TV. World's Fair, 1939, April 30th, 1939. I wanted to talk to him about, hey, was it good? And of course, Roosevelt appeared before huge crowds and had the fireside talk. And then the third is for this talk, baseball in the American culture. And Kennesaw Mountain Landis is the commissioner of baseball. And Pearl Harbor comes about. That's December 7th, 1941. And America goes to war after being bombed by the Japanese. And the commissioner Landis is in a dither at this point. What should we do? What should we do? Look, baseball in 1918 cut the season down because of World War I, not because of the Spanish flu, because of World War I. So what are we supposed to do? Back in 1918, the American League just wanted to stop. The National League wanted to keep going. We worked out a deal where there was a World Series, which was a good thing for the Boston Red Sox because behind the left arm of Babe Ruth, they defeated the Chicago Cubs to win the championship, and then the curse of the Bambino right afterwards because he was sent down to New York for some money that went to No Nanette. Frise was the Boston owner. But anyway, so Landis sends a letter. So I wanted to find out what Roosevelt did, and I did. It's called the Green Light Letter. I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Baseball provides a recreation which does not last over 2 or 2.5 hours. Roosevelt died in 1945, so he didn't see any of the Yankee Red Sox games of the last 15 years, some of which lasted, 4.5 hours or so, and which could be gotten for very little cost. Well, he's been dead for 76 years, so he doesn't know what the prices are. $80 opening day for the bleachers at Yankee Stadium this year. And incidentally, I hope that night games can be extended because it gives an opportunity to the day shift to see a game occasionally. Roosevelt wanted to get Americans' minds off of the war for an hour or 2 or 3 a day, and he felt baseball would do that. And I talked to the late Dan Rooney, who is the owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers of the NFL, and he said with that letter, the NFL knew it could play, and so did the National Hockey League, although most of the players were Canadian, and they had to get down to 6 teams because there weren't enough players to fill 7 teams. The New York Americans went out of business or suspended operations. So go ahead. Baseball is so ingrained in the culture in World War II that we need to keep it going just for the country's morale. And there's the Babe. The Babe was not a movie star, but he was in 10 different movies. 1920 silent film, Heading Home, stars Babe as, guess what? A baseball star. Babe Comes Home, 1927 silent movie. There's no print that has survived because you needed to really take care of the prints in those days. They just disintegrated, and that one did. But this one didn't. 1928, the Harold Lloyd silent movie Speedy. It's up on YouTube if you really want to see Babe and Harold Lloyd together. Babe is signing autographs, realizes he's got to get out to the stadium, Yankee Stadium, because there's a game. He hails a cab. Harold Lloyd is a cab driver, and mayhem ensues in that cab ride. He was in 10 movies overall, the last one being Pride of the Yankees. I'll talk to you about Landis afterwards. And it wasn't because of cultural significance, it was because of money, but I'll talk to you afterwards. Anyway, the absolute first baseball player who made it as an actor was a guy by the name of Mike Donlin. He played with the New York Giants, and he was called the baseball idol of Manhattan, and he was a pretty good player because he was a .333 hitter. He took multiple breaks from the game to perform on stage and in vaudeville. He retires in 1914 and goes right into the movies. And he goes into the movies and he sees a familiar face right off the bat, which is the name of the movie, John J. McGraw, his Giant manager, who also did a little acting in his career. It is thought that the baseball idol of Manhattan, Mike Donlin, did about 53 appearances on film. If you're ever in New Jersey, you ever go over the George Washington Bridge, Fort Lee is the first town there, go to the Fort Lee Library, and in the parking lot, apparently the Fort Lee Library sits on one of the first film studios ever in the United States, because in the parking lot and all around the area near the parking lot, there are little signs talking about this was filmed here, that was filmed here, all silent films back in the day. So Donlin probably had to take a ferry across to New Jersey and make some films back in those days. That is Lou Gehrig. And Lou Gehrig is in a movie called Rawhide. It's 1938, and it's a terrible movie. It's around somewhere, but it's kind of an interesting movie. Gehrig has decided he's done. He's had it as a professional baseball player. He's gone. He needs to retire and get out of New York and go to Montana, where he's bought some land, and he and his sister are going to become ranchers. Now, Gehrig grew up in New York, went K through 12 in New York, went to Columbia University, played with the New York Yankees, and lived in New Rochelle down the road here. And the street he lived on is called Lou Gehrig Way. Still there. The sign is still there, and the house is still there. And so this is 1938. He's in a Western, and he doesn't belong on the screen, but there he is. So it's a terrible movie, except for one thing. Lou Gehrig would be diagnosed with ALS in 1939. And doctors would have a baseline on how quickly the disease spread throughout his body by looking at this film that was shot in early 38. And they were able to see how he turned his head, how he moved his arms, how he moved his legs, his gait, and all that other stuff. I mean, obviously, there is some film of Gehrig playing the Foxtone movies or the Foxtone reels of the News of the Week, Sports of the Week, but you couldn't really see how he was operating. But the doctors could see. So for some medical research, this is kind of important. The other thing, which you probably don't realize, Gehrig, of course, the cleanup hitter for the Yankees, was the number 3 guy in the Yankees lineup, a guy who Bostonians are very familiar with, Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth got throat cancer, and he was taking an experimental treatment in 1947, 1948. It was called chemotherapy. And it was a last-ditch effort to try to save Babe's life. And he rallies a little bit after chemo, and then he passes away. But Ruth and Gehrig, Murderers Row and all that other stuff, did make some contribution to medical research, which baseball fans like, really? Yeah, really. So the 1938 film Rawhide opens up at Grand Central Terminal in New York. Gehrig is done, he's retired from baseball, and he's going out to Montana with his sister, even though he was married to Ellie at the time. But hey, it's Hollywood, right? Or wherever they wrote that movie. Oh, hey, Bugs Bunny, who everything I learned in life came from a Warner Brothers cartoon, Bugs Bunny. Bugs is a heckler. He's a comic too, so he's a perfect heckler. And he's heckling the Gas House Gorillas. Remember, 1934 World Series, St. Louis Cardinals, the Gas House Gang. And he's got his carrot juice, he's got his carrot, he's got his popcorn, and he's gonna murder the bums. And they take him up on his offer because the Gas House Gorillas are beating the teetotalers, and who look like guys from the 1890s, 40 50 years later, and he would win the game. Some of the other movies you might remember, there is Madonna jumping into the arms of Rosie O'Donnell with the chest protector is Gina Davis. League of Their Own also starred Tom Hanks. That is the movie where Hanks is a manager in this league, and Hanks is based on Jimmy Fox, managing the league. And the famous line from the movie is, "There's no crying in baseball." Based on the true story. This is the Rockford Peaches. Casey Candell, who's a coach with the Seattle Mariners today. About 25 years ago, I was talking to him about it. He was a utility player, you might remember, with the Montreal Expos, and he was the technical advisor on this film. And he said his mother played in this league, and his mother taught him how to hit, and he made it to the major leagues. Before this, there was a documentary which was shown on educational TV. Maybe WGHB in Boston. I think that's the call letters up there. And then it made a jump to the big screen with the big names. There's Gary Cooper as Lou Gehrig in Pride of the Yankees, the Babe's last film appearance. Bull Durham, Kevin Costner as Crash Davis, the veteran minor league catcher, not good enough ever to make it to the major leagues. Too good for the minor leagues, but he's a veteran catcher, and he's supposed to tutor meatballs like the Tim Robbins character with the $1 million arm and the 10-cent head. Of course, there's the love triangle as well with Susan Sarandon. Bull Durham. Jerry Lewis, when the Brooklyn Dodgers were uprooted by Walter O'Malley to Los Angeles for the 1958 season, Brooklyn Dodger players became highly wanted in television and film productions. Here is Jerry Lewis. The movie is called The Geisha Boy, and he's explaining to Pee Wee Reese what he wants done. And there is somebody who you might recognize from Boston to Jerry's left, your right looking, and it's none other than Don Zimmer. Don Zimmer over there. Robert Redford, in The Natural, in the library, you probably have the book and also the movie. Costner again, Field of Dreams, here talking to Joe Jackson. Baseball was supposed to have played a game in an Iowa cornfield last year. That was wiped out by COVID-19. They're going to try to do it again this year. It was supposed to be the Yankees and White Sox last year. And the smartest guy in baseball, all you have to do is ask him. Billy Beane of the Oakland A's, Moneyball, which the movie and the book is probably in the library. That's Brad Pitt playing Billy Beane, all about the Oakland A's, and Mike Lewis's book, Moneyball, along with the movie. Walter Matthau, who never did anything bad, in my opinion, on the screen. Here, he is the coach of the Bad News Bears, sponsored by Chico Bell Bonds. Matthau was great with Jack Lemmon, whether it would be the football-related movie, The Fortune Cookie, whether it be The Odd Couple. We'll talk a little more about The Odd Couple with Lemmon and Matthau in a bit, or the Grumpy Old Men series. And they always played the same character, whether it was Felix or Oscar or some equivalent to Felix and Oscar. Major League, Charlie Sheen, he was in Major League 1 and in Major League 2. And that's me in Pittsburgh in October of 2018, leaning against the fence, or not the fence, the brick wall at Forbes Field, which is the only thing that still survives at Forbes Field, which is right in the middle of the University of Pittsburgh, at Pitt. And behind there is Shenley Park. And if you walk to my right, left in the picture just a little bit, where Bill Mazeroski hit that home run in the bottom of the 7th inning, where it landed is right over the wall, and there's a big pink blotch on the sidewalk where Bill Mazeroski hit that home run, giving the Pittsburgh Pirates a Game 7 victory over the Yankees, with Yogi looking over his shoulder. The reason I bring this up is that Bing Crosby bought into the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1946, same year Bob Hope bought into the Cleveland Indians. And another comedian, Danny Kaye, had a piece of the Seattle Mariners in 1977. But for those of you who remember the Road to pictures, the Road to the Major Leagues, starring Hope and Crosby, Cleveland and Pittsburgh. But Crosby probably got some of the filming of the movie Angels in the Outfield done in Pittsburgh, because he was a minority owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates. These are not all the movies, obviously, but Pride of the Yankees, Bull Durham, Major League, Angels in the Outfield, Fields of Dream, The Geisha Boy, Bad News Bears, The Natural, The Moneyball, just some of, Moneyball, just some of the movies in baseball. I've been a journalist for a very, very long time, and I've met a lot of people that I probably never should have ever met in my life. Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan. I knew Nixon actually somewhat here in New York. He used to show up at Yankees and Mets games, and he was the arbitrator of the 1984-85 baseball umpires dispute, and that's where I got to know him. Oh, call me Dick. Anyway, like I said, I've been fortunate in my career as a journalist because I meet people. And one of the guys I met when I was 23 years old was Nat Fine. There are very few, if any, Pulitzer Prize winning sports pictures. This is one of them. Of Babe Ruth, his final appearance at Yankee Stadium, cancer-ridden Ruth. Now, in my career, I've had 4 scoops. And I can tell you one thing, when you get a scoop, you don't work at it. It's a matter of being in the right place at the right time, running into the right person. Of all 4 of my scoops. But anyway, and one was John Lindsay running for Senate in New York back in 1979, which got me on WNEW in New York. Another was the end of the 1982 NFL players strike. Another, the end of the 1990 NHL players strike, and one Alex Spanos in the San Diego Chargers being upset that he didn't get a new stadium that eventually would lead to the Chargers moving to Los Angeles. So I'm 23 years old, and I run into Nat Fine. And Nat Fine was a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, this 1948 picture. And he ended up losing his newspaper job. He had pictures of everybody. Anybody who's anybody, he had a picture of during his career. But 1965, he loses his job at the Journal American as there's a merger between 3 New York papers, New York World and Sun, the Journal American, and the Herald Tribune. And I meet him. He's working for Orange and Rockland Utilities, taking pictures of utility poles that have been broken or squirrels that ate into wires and basically electrocuted themselves and caused blackouts. So we talked about this. And I said, how'd you get that picture? He said, well, we're all in the Yankee clubhouse. It was on the third base side in those days. And we're all taking pictures of Babe getting dressed. We know it's the last time. He's in really bad shape. So we're taking pictures of him. And so everybody goes out in the field. He says, yeah, I decide I'm going to follow Babe. And I'll go out there and I'll get to the other guys. As you can see, they're on that first base side. And he says, it's a national anthem. So he stops, it's a national anthem. So he stops, and there's the Babe, and the Babe's leaning on the bat. He can't put his cap over his heart because he's in such a weakened condition. And he just takes these pictures. And these pictures become, or this picture particularly, became a Pulitzer Prize winning picture. Homer Simpson honored by the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2017, 25 years after the Springfield nuclear power plant won the city championship. There's Sandy Koufax, and I'm not sure if he's signing that autograph for Mr. Ed or Wilbur. Wilbur Post, played by Alan Young. Koufax was on Mr. Ed. Herman Munster, Leo DeRocher signs him to a Dodger contract on the Munsters. Herman doesn't make it because he's hurting too many players. He's 7'4", 560 pounds. He can hit the ball, but that's about all he can do. Jim Lefevre is on the left and Al Ferrara on the right. Frenchie, Jim Lefevre was the Seattle manager in 1997. I asked him, I said, what were you doing on Gilligan's Island? He said, we were headhunters. We're going to shrink Gilligan's head and eat him. He's got the ketchup and the mustard out there. Al Ferrara is with him. They were both with the Dodgers, and Ferrara said that he knew he made it as a major leaguer when he had his face on the baseball card. Johnny Roseborough, Dragnet, 1968. Looks like a very Dragnetian type thing, doesn't it? Johnny Roseborough was on quite a few shows, as was Walter O'Malley, the Dodgers owner, who appeared with the Rifleman star, Rifleman, a TV show from the 1950s, and the one-time Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman Chuck Connors. and they were in a show called Branded on NBC in 1965. The Dodger center fielder, Willie Davis, acted in The Love Machine, Jerry Lewis's Which Way to the Front, and the TV show The Flying Nun. Roseboro, Dragnet 68, Brooks Law, Craft Suspense Theater, Mr. Ed, and Experiment in Terror. Now, when I'm live, and I did this live on Saturday, so people actually told me who the guy on the left was. You could type it in if you want, if you know who the guy on the left is. But when I'm live, I ask, who's that guy on the left? Who's that guy on the right? A lot of people of a certain age know that's Phil Silvers on the left, and they have no idea that Steve Bilko is the guy on the right. But they watched in the 1950s the Bilko show, and then they also watched in reruns You'll Never Get Rich or the Phil Silvers show. So they knew that his name was Bilko, but they didn't know that was Steve Bilko. Steve Bilko was a great player in the Pacific Coast League with the Los Angeles Angels. He kept coming up to the major leagues, but just couldn't hang on. I mean, he did, but he wasn't good enough for the major leagues. He was too good for the minor leagues. Nat Hiken, who wrote the Bilko show and also Car 54, Where Are You?, which had a lot of references to baseball, maybe thanks to Will Glickman, looked at him and he said, he's my guy. He's going to be my guy. That's who I'm naming my character after, which brought up Yogi one day. And I'm sitting in that back room with Yogi and I say, hey, Yogi, you were on the Phil Silver show, yeah? Yeah. Now, the plot of the show is, Bilko's trying to pull some con job, and he's at Fort Baxter in Kansas. So I'm trying to figure this out, and I figured I'd ask Yogi about it. I said, what were members of the New York Yankees doing at Fort Baxter? He said, no, we're in the Bronx. I said, yeah, I know you were in the Bronx because you did it at the Biograph Studios in the Bronx off Southern Boulevard. I know all that. He said, but what were you doing in Kansas? And he said, no, we're in the Bronx. At that point, I said, but you were in Kansas. He said, no, I drove to the George Washington Bridge, went on the Cross Bronx Expressway. We got off, drove to Southern Boulevard, and then we're in the Bronx. And at that point, I figured, you know what, Yogi, you're absolutely right. You were in the Bronx. You were in Kansas. Donna Reed Show. Don Drysdale was on the Donna Reed Show. Brady Bunch, Mr. Ed, The Munsters, Phil Silver Show, also known as Bilko. Baseball and the culture on TV. And here's a cultural icon of sorts, maybe, depending on if you ever watched the show. Moose Stubing, who was the manager of the Anaheim Angels in the late 1980s. And, Captain Merrill Stubing of the Love Boat. Captain Stubing and Moose Stubing. Aaron Spelling, who was the king of schlock, as he described himself, used the Baseball Encyclopedia to name his TV characters. And he named Captain Stubing of the Love Boat for Moose Stubing. And I once said to Moose Stubing, you getting money for it? He said, no, but I know it's me. John Forsythe, who was in Dynasty, worked for Aaron Spelling. You might know some of Spelling's hits. Forsythe was the voice that you never saw the face in Charlie's Angels. It was The Love Boat. It was Fantasy Island, The Pain, and Dynasty, and a whole host of others. Anyway, John Forsythe landed his first paying job at the ballpark as an announcer at Dodger games at Ebbets Field in the 1950s. He had that great voice, if you remember. And he would star. He'd be the lead star of one of Spelling's biggest hits with Joan Collins and Linda Evans' Dynasty in the 1980s. And he goes full circle. He goes from the press box onto the field as he is a member of the Hollywood All-Stars or the Dodger All-Stars charity game. And to his right and your left is Jack Lemmon. And he was in a baseball movie of sorts called The Odd Couple. You gotta remember, he played Felix Unger. And Walter Matthau played Oscar Madison. 1968 movie, The Odd Couple. And the old thing, can two divorced men live together without driving each other crazy? Well, there's a scene in The Odd Couple, and it's at Shea Stadium. And it's at the press box, the old press box at Shea Stadium, which is long gone. And Felix calls the payphone. Now, I know exactly where the payphone was. It was next to the official scorer's box with a post in front of it and a short cord. So you really couldn't see what was going on at the game. And also the noise came back at you. And so Jack Lemmon calls, or rather Felix Unger calls Oscar Madison. Madison, the phone's for you. So Madison gets up from the main press box. He walks over. Yeah, who's this? Oh, Felix. And Felix is asking, what do you want for dinner? Meanwhile, there's action taking place on the baseball field. Bill Mazeroski is up for the film, and he grounds into a triple play. Initially, it was supposed to be Roberto Clemente, and he said no. And so Madison hears, Oscar hears all the noise. What happened? What happened? And I think it was Haywood Helbrun or somebody like that says to Oscar Madison, oh, you missed the best player of the year, a triple play. And of course, that leads to an argument over the phone between Felix and Oscar. Bob Uecker, Mr. Baseball, bet you I'll be in the front row. Bob Uecker was an obscure catcher for the Milwaukee Braves, the St. Louis Cardinals, the Philadelphia Phillies, and the Atlanta Braves. He ends his career with and gets a job in community relations with the Atlanta Braves. And on the side, he's also a stand-up comic, and the trumpet player Al Hurt sees him one day, calls up Carson's people almost immediately, Freddie DeCovida, and says, hey, you got to get this guy on. It's the funniest guy I've seen in a long, long time. Get him on the show. And of course, if you're invited to that seat next to the desk, if you're a comic, it's like hitting a walk-off home run in the World Series. You're a star. And Uecker kills, and Johnny invites him to the couch. And they start talking. There's a commercial break, and Uecker and Carson are talking. And Carson turns over to him and says, is it true that you were a Major League Baseball player? And he says, yeah, I had one of these, so I must have been. Incidentally, Bob Uecker, his hit Sandy Koufax better than anybody else he hit. He's Hall of Famer against Koufax. Broadway, whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. Damn Yankees. Written in the 1950s, Yankees win 5 straight championships. And Washington is, although they had been in the World Series in 1933, first in war, first in peace, last in the American League, Joe Hardy decides to sell his soul to the devil. There were 2 songs that came out of there, Whatever Lola Wants, Lola Gets, and You've Got to Have Heart. And the Amazing Mets are on Old Sullivan's show. Oh, okay. Got to look at the time. That's what Ed used to do. My cousin was Jerry Stiller, and Stiller and Mirror were on that show 36 times. And when my TV talk, I talk about Ed and the show and Stiller and Mirror and all that other stuff. But here's Ed honoring the 1969 Mets. Beat the Baltimore Orioles in 5 games in the 1969 World Series. The Amazing Mets, and there is virtually the entire team. Gil Hodges is not there, but everybody else, virtually everybody else is there, and Ed must have had a ball because he started out his career as a sports writer with the New York Daily News. And oh, speaking of Cousin Jerry, it's Cousin Jerry with my kids a while ago. Speaking of Jerry Stiller, oh, segue. I'm in radio. I know how to do segues. Segue to Jerry Seinfeld and George Steinbrenner. And George was a central character on the Seinfeld show, and probably the last show that of its type that had baseball in the culture on network TV on a regular basis. George, if you knew anything about George, he was a buffoon. I mean, let's get that out of the way. He was a buffoon. He was a cartoon character, actually. There was good George and bad George, and I could, a psychiatrist would have a great time with him. Anyway, not Rick Cerrone, Marty Appel, who was the Yankee PR guy at one time when George started in the 70s, once told me that they had a lot of good inside information for some of the scripts for the Seinfeld show. How good? They were suggested by George, who became friendly with Larry David. And there are three I'll talk about. Missing George, which features my cousin Jerry Seinfeld. Board meeting moved in different uniforms. Missing George. Well, George owned American Shipbuilding Company, although he wasn't the largest shareholder. John McMullen, who almost bought the Boston Red Sox before John Henry was. But he's down in Tampa most of the time, and he's got a guy who's working for him. And George's a little worried about this guy because he thinks that this guy, he's hanging out with bad people. And so it's a Friday afternoon. George says, so long, have a good weekend to everybody. And he's gone. George used to go into work about 5 o'clock in the morning, and he noticed this guy's cars in the parking lot. And oh my God, They got him. They got him. And he calls the Tampa police, and they put out an all points bulletin looking for this guy, looking for the guy. And the guy strolled in the afternoon. George, so where were you? And he said, I just went away with friends. I'm fine and all that. They turned that into a show. The show was about George Costanza, who was the assistant traveling secretary of the New York Yankees. And George is missing. His car is in the parking lot at Yankee Stadium. Steinbrenner pulls in. Nobody else is there, and except the car is there. And George in Seinfeld acts the same way. And eventually they have to go to George Costanza's father, Frank Costanza, played by my cousin Jerry Stiller. And we think George is dead. And Jerry Stiller looks up for a second. You traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? Great line in the whole play, in the whole episode. And yeah, Jay Buhner had a great career with Seattle, and Ken Phelps was a total washout with the Yankees. And eventually they would find George. Board meeting moved. Well, if George saw something on your plate that he liked, he took it off and ate it. Apparently there was a board meeting at Yankee Stadium that Marty Appel attended. And George smelled something, Italian food from near the stadium, picked up, he asked, where'd you get it? Picked up the entire board meeting and moved it to the restaurants. And they tried the different uniforms in Tampa with the Florida State League, out of business now, Florida State League, Tampa Yankees. George actually tried out for Seinfeld. Here he is with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. You go up to YouTube and you can watch the clip and you could understand why George, who probably thought he was a thespian, and they wanted a buffoon, well, they got actor George, and they didn't want actor George. Seinfeld was quoted. He actually did a scene in the show. It was terrible. We couldn't use it. We cut him out. He wasn't funny. I don't remember exactly what went wrong with it, but it was quite an awkward situation. Keith Hernandez, who was not friends with Seinfeld initially, was on the show. George Costanza is jealous of Keith Hernandez because he thinks that Keith is cutting into his friendship with Jerry Seinfeld. Hernandez said when his agent Scott Boras asked him, you want to be on Seinfeld? He said, what's that? He said, well, they'll fly you out first class. You'll be up in the hotel for a week. They'll pay you 15 grand. Oh, I know who Seinfeld is. He played himself on the show. And now they're apparently really good friends. Oh, George was on Saturday Night Live. You don't have baseball players hosting Saturday Night Live anymore, but you had him. And and he did a skit where he played every position for the Yankees, was coach, was the manager and general manager and the owner. It wasn't too far from the truth. It really wasn't. And you might remember Garrett Morris. Baseball been very, very good to me. Chico Escuela. Saturday Night Live actually had a Chico Escuela night, Al Lang Field, St. Petersburg, Florida, prior to a New York Mets, New York Yankees preseason game. But baseball has fallen out on television. You just don't see it very much anymore. Oh, speaking of television, I was going to take this out. Wally Pipp, replaced by Lou Gehrig 96 years ago. When I was a kid, you heard the expression, don't get Wally Pipped, which means go to work sick. And even if you're sick, just go to work because somebody might take your job better than you and you might get fired. I was going to take this out. Lou Gehrig obviously replaces him June 2nd, 1925. He did have a headache, and because he had been beaten a few days beforehand. Anyway, so Wally Pipp loses his job, but I was going to take this out. 96 years ago, who cares, right? Yeah, who cares? 96 years ago, except Wally was the answer to a Jeopardy question. Season 37, show 1, September 2020 with Alex Trebek. And I figured if Jeopardy could still have Wally Pipp in it, I could still have Wally Pipp in it. Baseball and cigarettes, presenting Babe Ruth in the blindfold cigarette test. There is the Babe, looks like he's on Old Sparky and Sing Sing, about ready to get electrocuted. Now the cough in the carload, smoother and better. Babe Ruth sponsored Old Gold. Chesterfield, the baseball man cigarette, and 2 Boston players are in here. Bob Elliott, the 1947 Boston Braves National League Player of the Year, MVP of the Year, and Teddy Ballgame, Ted Williams. Oh yeah, and there's Joe D. Guarantee you Joe D didn't pay for that cigarette. the baseball man cigarette Chesterfield. You know, I knew Joe Garagiola, who grew up with Yogi Berra. They knew each other from 1927 until Yogi's passing in 2017, 88 years. And they called each other every Sunday. And Joe once said to me, you know, when Yogi steps in it, business-wise, he steps in it. Yoo-hoo. I don't know if you had Yoo-hoo up in the Boston area. It's just, it was chocolate and water put together. But Yogi made a ton of money off of it. And Mickey Mantle allegedly drank it, probably had some Cutty Sark in there. Moose Gowan, who I love, great interview, funny guy, loved him. He was with Washington there. Just told me some incredibly great stories. Really nice guy, the late Moose Gowan and the late Elston Howard, the MVP of the American League in 1963. So Garagiola said, when Yogi stepped in it, he stepped in it. And Yogi goes to a country club back in 55, and the people who put together Yoo-hoo, who put together this concoction, they meet Yogi at a country club, and they have an idea. Why don't we let Yogi taste it? Because we can't get it on the supermarket. We can't get it on supermarket shelves. Maybe if Yogi likes it, maybe he can help us sell it to people. So they give Yogi the drink, and Yogi tastes it. And they all varies each other. I'm like, They say, what do you think? Yogi's on board. Yogi becomes a board member, makes a lot of money. And Dave Kaplan told me this story. In the library, you might have two of Yogi's books that Dave actually ghost wrote. And he was the guy who ran the museum. Anyway, Dave was telling me this story. One time, that Yogi told him, one time I was in the office and the phone rang. And when no one else was around, I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who was calling asked if Yoo-hoo was hyphenated. I said, no, ma'am, it's not even carbonated. Yogi sold Kraft Italian dressing. Press the light, high-level batteries, needs water only 3 times a year. I had a car, 1966 Chevrolet. I was 17 years old, 1973. Had to put water in the battery. He sold Miller Lite. So did Marv Throneberry and Boog Bell and the umpire, Jim Honachek. Yogi sold bicycles, a Shelby. But Yogi was overshadowed, at least in the early part of his career, by this guy, Joe DiMaggio. And there is Joe with Marilyn Monroe. And they get married. They elope in January 1954, and 10 months later, Marilyn Monroe is gone. She cites only mental cruelty. And if you talk to the old Yankee players back in the day, whether it was Johnny Blanchard or Tommy Tresh, the stories they heard, this is hearsay for me, it was more than mental cruelty. But apparently that ended the DiMaggio-Monroe marriage. Stamford, Connecticut, this is 2017. And Stamford, Connecticut, where Jackie Robinson lived, is a community that has outdoor art every year, different things that go around the town, outdoor art. In this particular year, they had 26-foot Marilyn Monroe. And they strategically put her where her derriere faced the First Congregational Church of Stamford, and her left side, my left side, your right side, faced another church. So you got a side view as she walked out. Anyway, apparently Joe D was on the set the day that the 7-year itch scene was filmed, with the subway grading and the skirt went up, and the marriage was soon over after that night. Again, I've heard a lot of hearsay, and she filed for mental cruelty, so that's all I could say about that. Joe DiMaggio was in Song, Mrs. Robinson, which started out as Mrs. Roosevelt. We didn't start the fire, Joe and Joe. Duke Ellington had a song called Did You See Jackie Hit the Ball? And Therese Brewer with Mickey. Let's talk about a song that you've probably heard 20,000 times in your life, if you've heard it once, Mrs. Robinson, which started out as just a snippet in the movie The Graduate. And Mike Nichols and others told Paul Simon, you know what? That sounds good. Why don't you make a whole song out of it? And he does. And he brings it back to Mike Nichols. And it's Mrs. Roosevelt. It's about Eleanor Roosevelt. And Joe is in there. And Mike Nichols says, no, it's from now on, it's Mrs. Robinson, and it becomes Mrs. Robinson. But anyway, Joe and Paul, according to the Yankee people like Whitey Ford, went out to dinner, as they told me the story. And apparently Joe walks into dinner after the song comes out. What do you mean? Where have I gone? I'm here. I'm with you. I did a Bowery commercial last week. I'm doing Mr. Coffee. I'm here. I didn't go anywhere. And then Paul Simon decides to go intellect on him, saying, well, you know, I was thinking about heroes and all this, and DiMaggio couldn't. Dominic DiMaggio would have been able to comprehend, but Joe wasn't going to comprehend this. And so I'm looking for heroes, and, you know, you were 10 years old when you last played, and I was 10 years old when you last played. You went away. I never saw you again. Where'd you go? And he tries to go intellectual with it. Can't. He's on the Dick Cavett show, he being Paul Simon, and he says, I didn't mean the lines literally. I thought of him as an American hero. He thought of Eleanor Roosevelt and Ted Williams as American heroes. And genuine heroes were in short supply. He claimed Joe D, accepted the explanation and thanked me. We shook hands, said goodnight, and I guarantee you Paul Simon paid for that dinner. Dick Cavett knew that Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio hated one another. DiMaggio, at the end of his career, would look to his left and he'd see this beautiful, blonde, young guy. He's 20 years old, can run like the wind. He's chiseled. His name is from the earth. It's Mantle. And he's an old guy with a bad heel on his way out. Mickey hated Joe because in the 1951 World Series, there's a fly ball hit to right field. Mickey is running like the wind, trips over a drain, tears up his knee, and complained that DiMaggio loafed on the ball and hated him for that. So Cavett knew the backstory, and Mickey once asked Paul Simon, why'd you use him? Why not me? And Paul Simon said, Mickey Mantle doesn't sound as good as Joe DiMaggio. So Simon tells Dick Cavett, it's all about syllables, Dick. It's about how many beats there are. Mickey made it up, or Paul Simon made it up to Mickey in the Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard video. Mickey is there batting left-handed. That's Terry Cashman. He and I share a periodontist. I saw my periodontist 10 days ago. He's this patient of that periodontist. I've known Terry since the 1980s, since this song came out. Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, talking baseball. Terry Cashman. There's a missing tooth in there, in that smile. Duke Snider, Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle. Who's missing? Joe DiMaggio. DiMaggio was in that original picture. He was airbrushed out of the record sleeve. And it's a song about baseball in the 1950s. And Joe DiMaggio asked, well, why wasn't I in there? He said, it's about people from my childhood, 10, 11, 12 years old. And you were on the way out. And Joe accepted the explanation saying, yeah, you're right. I was on the way out. 1981 song, baseball balladeer. Phil Rizzuto, oh, the Scooter. He's a Hall of Famer and the only Hall of Famer with a gold record. Jim Steinman just passed away. He wrote Paradise by the Dashboard Light and Bat Out of Hell. He passed away yesterday. And Jim Steinman and Meatloaf, who lived near me, got to know Meatloaf a little bit, wanted Rizzuto on Paradise by the Dashboard Light. For those of you who remember the song or you don't remember the song, it's about a young couple in a car, and using the baseball analogy, the guy wants to come home and score, and the woman says, only if you promise to marry me. And she allows it. He's stuck with her for the rest of his life. But they get Rizzuto in there and they're recording and recording and recording, and Phil is not acting like Phil Rizzuto. Finally, after about 100 takes, Phil decides, okay, well, here we are. And he's narrating this guy who's rounding the bases, safe at second, safe at third. He's going to try to come home, you know, and he does. Scooter's kids were going to university and colleges in Boston in the late 1970s. And Rizzuto's kids told him, yeah, that song was about sex. And he said, hey, he fooled me. And I asked Rizzuto one day, did you know what the song was about? He said, that Huckleberry, he fooled me, but he kept the gold record. Baseball cards, as we come to the end of this thing, the baseball cards. Cy Berger invented the modern baseball card with tops, complete with bubble gum. And my periodontist and oral surgeon thanks the late Cy Berger, who passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 98, for introducing me to the bubble gum, which was probably as hard as the floor that you're on right now that you bit in and did a number on your teeth. But anyway, the baseball card. Well, before the internet, you had in calculators, if you were a baseball fan and you wanted to do something on the back of the baseball card to update the back of the baseball card, you better know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And this thing helped you with that. Gambling. Now, you probably never thought of this. You probably never thought of gambling, but you used to flip cards, right? You flipped cards like, okay, that's gambling because you were going to lose cards or win cards. You also learned how to make business decisions by trading your baseball card. Also, on the cover, this happens to have an Oakland player. If you were interested in geography, you could look up Oakland, go to your atlas, go to your globe. And they made great bicycle flaps. You put the clothespin in to the spoke, you connected the card to the spoke, it whirled and whirled and whirled and whirled and whirled and made those great sounds. But today, baseball is not all that important in the culture. How many new songs are there? Not many, if any at all. New literature? Oh, that reminds me of Yogi. Reminds me of Yogi. Ernest Hemingway, Old Man in the Sea, probably have that in the library. Ernest Hemingway. He's brought down to the Yankee clubhouse to meet all of the players individually. Ernest Hemingway, Mickey Mantle, Ernest Hemingway, blah, 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 blah. Ernest Hemingway, Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra, Ernest Hemingway. Yogi sticks out his hand and says, "What paper you work for, Ernie?" Should have said the Kansas City Star. Would have been right. It's just another sport these days. It's not what it once was. Oh yes, Homer Simpson, honored by the Baseball Hall of Fame 2017. Also there, Casey at the bat, Thayer. John Fogerty's record, the 45 center field, that came in 1985. The movie League of Their Own, and of course, Who's on First? Joe Namath, here I am with Joe in 1988. To my left is my buddy Bruce Morton, who occasionally joins me on these talks. I'm talking to Joe about the 20th anniversary of the Jets beating Baltimore and cementing the Super Bowl as a major component in American society today. Baseball has never recovered. In 1950, it was baseball, horse racing, and boxing. That was it in American sports. By 1965, football surpassed baseball. Baseball is a great regional sport. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago. Great, great regional sport. This guy was bigger than boxing. This guy was one of the biggest guys in the world. This is 1985, me and Muhammad Ali. Boxing went downhill after Ali and Tyson. And horse racing survives because they have slot machines at many racetracks. Jim Bouton, who ended his life in the Berkshires out in Great Barrington, wrote the quintessential baseball book, which is probably in the library, Ball 4, which humanized baseball players. And we found out that Mickey Mantle was a rascal, that he drank, and that players had opinions on life, and it wasn't all baseball. Jim Bouton, who he and I became very friendly over the years. We always crisscrossed, but we only were at an opportunity to give a talk once at Yogi's place, and he went on before me, and I went on after him. So according to the New York Public Library, maybe the library there, one of the 20 most influential books of the 20th century. Soccer has surpassed baseball with kids. Higher ratings for soccer games among kids. More kids are playing soccer, organized soccer, than baseball. I'm in a movie called The Sons of Ben, which is about the Philadelphia Union soccer team, and this came out in 2015, and here I am on the red carpet in that movie. And we end with the late Mike Dyer talking to Yogi Berra. You know, it ain't over until it's over. Nobody goes to that restaurant anymore because it's too crowded. Hey, future ain't what it used to be. If you see a fork in the road, take it. It gets late early out there, talking about the shadows at Yankee Stadium. Conversation with Carmen Berra and Yogi Berra. Carmen Berra says to Yogi, "Hey, Yogi, you know, you grew up in St. Louis. You played in New York, and you live here in New Jersey. Where do you want to be buried?" Surprised me. "Oh, you better go to their funeral, because if you don't go to their funeral, they're not going to go to your funeral." Mike Dyer, 1973. Yogi is managing the New York Mets. And the most famous saying of all, it ain't over until it's over. There's not much of a story behind this. In fact, I could tell you that Yogi was quoted in arguments before the Supreme Court more than anybody else in United States Supreme Court history. Yogi. Anyway, so Mike Dyer is a sports writer with a Long Island press. Yogi's Mets are hanging in. It's 1973. They're hanging in. They're hanging in. They're hanging in. Nobody's running away with the National League East. Chicago, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Montreal, Philadelphia. Nobody's really playing all that well that you can say they're going to win the pennant. And Yogi's team's hanging in there. There are a few games out, but they still have a shot. But they can't lose any games. They really are living on the razor's edge. You lose a game or two here, the season's over. And Mike Dyer and the media, they're meeting with Yogi after a game in September of 1973 at Shea Stadium. They're all around Yogi's desk. And Mike Dyer looks at Yogi and says, "Is it over?" Ain't over until it's over. It's over. It is over. Thank you so much. I'm here for questions and answers or comments. The floor is yours, Lindsay, and everybody else.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Evan. There were a few things in the
Yeah, I saw the ones in the chat. Do you subscribe to the theory that Landis and his fellow jurists found baseball to be exempt from the antitrust law because of its cultural significance? That's possible, but baseball, the Oliver Wendell Holmes thing, 1922, they said baseball was a game. It wasn't an interstate business. They got it wrong. It was an interstate business. And culturally, yeah, there was some cultural existence. It was the only sport that mattered in the United States at that point. But I think that the owners were looking for jurists like Landis, who helped them up the ladder in that antitrust suit. They were looking for justices that could give them some breaks. So, you know, that could be, but I just think they got it wrong in 1922. Dylan, how many seasons he played to keep that average? Who played to keep what average up? You got to tell me. And my dad won a Mike Schmidt baseball card, I guess, that way. Anybody else? Anybody have anything else to say? Go ahead. Floor is yours. I've talked enough. The person who hit, oh, Mike Donlin, he played parts of about 10 years, but mostly he was an actor. Mostly he was an actor. Okay, I love Seinfeld, one of my favorite. No, it was Joe DiMaggio. It was Joe DiMaggio, not Mickey. It was Joe. Remember Dinky Donuts and Joe? Yeah, so that was that. Yeah, Jerry Stiller. By the way, Jerry Stiller, if you knew my family, you would know immediately that there wasn't much acting in Jerry Stiller's part as Frank Costanza. That is my family. Oh, Mickey. Oh, right. You're right about that. That was the fantasy, right? The fantasy camp. You're right about that. In the fantasy camp with Mickey Mantle. I forgot about that one. The other one was Joe DiMaggio. So, anybody else? Well, Lindsay, I want to thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. This was so wonderful. We really appreciate it.
Where do you see baseball in our culture 10 years from now? That's a good question. Baseball, it's a really good question because baseball is doing all these things to try to attract a young audience. Obviously, if you listen to music today, there's a lot of reference to basketball in the hip hop. And also, if you look around, basketball players are producing shows like LeBron James. You know, the basketball players, and I think partly it's because you could see their faces and they're right in front of you. Hockey players wear helmets, football players wear helmets. You know, baseball players are kind of aloof. Anyway, you know, you're putting runners on second base in extra innings. basically to cut down the time of games. Now, everybody complains about baseball being a 3-hour game. How many of you watch football? How many of you watch football? You notice the NFL now starts games at 4:15, 4:25, not 4 o'clock the way they used to. Football games last about the same as baseball games, except, and football has less action than baseball. There's more action baseball than football. Yet, I don't know. They're trying all sorts of things to speed up the game, the 7-inning doubleheaders, yet they are destroying the minor leagues. Up in Lowell, you have the team in Lowell, right? They're not there anymore. I don't understand, except I know the bean counters have taken over. And it's the bottom line. It's all of this other stuff. Why do you take away? Why, if you're baseball, this is about 15 years ago, why don't you let Little League use the team names? They took the team's names away and told Little League, you got a licensing. You better sign this licensing fee or don't use the team names. Stupid. All these things. And, and they're competing with basketball, with football, with baseball, with rather hockey and soccer. But they all these guys like John Henry owns the Red Sox, and yet he also owns the Liverpool team. When I do a politics of sports business talk, I always talk about the Red Sox. Tell me what they are. Well, Red Sox are a baseball team. Red Sox are a TV network. Red Sox have a radio station. Red Sox have a marketing agency. Red Sox or real estate. Red Sox have Liverpool. Red Sox have minor league baseball, and it's so on and so forth. So, that is, so why is he trying to, except he's in the market that's going to love baseball regardless, but baseball is just the regional game now. It's not a national game. Take a look at the All-Star ratings. Take a look at the World Series ratings. So they're actually trying to do something. I know the White Sox and the Chicago Blackhawks have an agreement back and forth. Of course, Fenway hosted the NHL January 1st game. So they're actually trying to do stuff. Where does the game have growth potential? Not in China. It remains popular in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Central America, Australia. They're trying in Europe, but it's awfully difficult to beat soccer in Europe, particularly if they're not forming a super league like John Henry wanted to do. They can't get into the inner cities in America. There's no interest. So before you go to China, why don't you try to drum up interest in pockets of the country that have no interest in you anymore? So their marketing is not very good. And they may have an impasse after this year, and the players may be locked out, or there may be a strike next year. And that's not going to help them coming off a pandemic, because it's going to say, what is wrong with these people? We just had a pandemic. Give it a year, extend it a year before you have your showdown. But, the two sides will dig in, and we will see what we will see.
All right, just a few comments for you to read there, and then I think we can.
Yeah, because the TV money is so big, John. The TV money, and also, I don't want to get into my other talk about the politics of sports business, because that'll keep you here another hour or 3. But John Nash, who was the general manager of the New Jersey Nets in 2000, he and I were sitting around one day of the NBA, and he was talking about how the NBA had completely gone from, they didn't do walk-ups anymore. And I'm sure in Boston, they don't sell walk-up tickets. They want all the tickets sold in advance. And so he told me that they had gone totally corporate. The money that's coming into baseball, yeah, they are in decline, but the money is coming into baseball from TV is absolutely enormous. It's going to be bigger because there'll be more platforms in the future. As you can see with the NFL, what they did through 2033. So there'll be more money available, whether it's Amazon or well, Netflix won't get into that business, but Amazon will get into that business. So, and the corporate money is amazing. And tell me, when was the last time you paid $4 to get into a baseball game? Get good tickets. I mean, all those luxury boxes, when Fenway Park was built, they didn't have luxury boxes. All those premium seats. Look, the New York Islanders sold out 80% of their premium seats at the new place in Belmont. The NFL judges sellouts not by the people inside the stadium, but whether or not the premium seats are sold out. So as long as corporations are buying premium seats, taking it off as a deduction of some sort, doing business, they don't have any problems because the ballparks will be filled. Their problems will be how many eyeballs to the TV and whether or not people are interested. The other problem with baseball, the average age of the baseball fan is 61. 61. That is not good. Only golf is older than they are. So, anybody else? Well, Lindsay, again, thank you so much. I hope they enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was great. And maybe someday we could have you in person.
Maybe, one day at a time.
Yeah. All right.
We can do this again on Zoom if you have room at some point.
All right. That sounds good.
So,
all right. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good week. Stay safe. My name is Evan Weiner. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for attending. Thank you, Lindsay, and have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everybody.